In a video I did recently, and by recently I actually don't remember how recently because everything blurs together after a time, you might recall me saying that you shouldn't get too excited about this V10 vote because it's likely that the vote won't pass. And the vote didn't pass. President Soleiman's distraction tactic of bringing back the fabled V10s was exactly that. A distraction. The FIA once again being in the news because Deputy President for Sport Robert Reid quit his job because, well, he has a sense of ethics and couldn't sit around and do his job while the president, it seems, kept going against everything that the FIA stands for. And that's why I say the whole thing was a distraction, because the president seemed to suddenly come up with this proposal just as everybody was piling in on him and saying some not nice things. Now look, I don't want to say it, but if you thought they were going to come back, he got you. And it was probably never going to go ahead anyway because of how things are going with the engine manufacturers. The ones who voted against the changes were Audi, Honda and Mercedes. Mercedes and Honda because they've been on the hybrid and EV train for some time, even before any proposed bans on new petrol and diesel cars, and Audi was going to be against it because they'd been lured into Formula 1 with promises of a rule set that they'd committed to too much for them to then change. And with GM having their engine supply confirmed from 2029 onwards, it's likely that they would have voted no as well, because they would have sunk in too much money on a hybrid for it to then just change to something else incredibly quickly, and they want a return on that investment. It's all business, really. And scrolling through the comments left on articles that were posted around the time, which was just before the Bahrain Grand Prix, which, well, actually that does fall in line with Robert Reid quitting his job, not many people seem surprised, repeating what I said earlier about it all being smoke and mirrors and a way of getting people to forget that they were saying nasty things about the president for at least a little bit. But with the committing to the 2026 regulations and no return to the fabled V10s in the near future, the talks are still ongoing. Sorry to disappoint you once again, but it's not about the V10s, but it's more to do with how there is still uncertainty surrounding the 2026 engines. We are now less than 12 months away from seeing these new engines out on track, but the problem is nobody seems to know exactly what is going on. We, as fans, know the sum of sod all about these new engines, and the teams are worried about how they're going to perform on track. So let's break down what we're going from and what we're going to. Currently, the hybrid power units, which I will just call engines from now on, consist of 5 parts. The internal combustion engine, which is a 1.6 litre V6, a turbocharger, the batteries, and 2 extra components called the MGU-K and MGU-H. The MGU-K is motor generator unit kinetic. So remember the Curse system from about, 15 years ago? It's like that, but a bit more powerful. The MGU-K takes kinetic energy from the brakes and turns it into electrical energy, which is then stored in the batteries. I think the MGU-K can also use the rear axle to charge the batteries as the car's driving along, which is pretty much how every road-going hybrid works, at least these self-charging ones. The other part is the MGU-H, motor generator unit heat. Most hybrid road cars other than these exotic supercars don't have one of these. They're considered unnecessary weight and they're overly complex. On top of that, they only have one real function, using excess exhaust gas to spool up a generator that also charges the batteries. This is the part they're getting rid of for 2026, and it will hopefully make the car smaller and lighter, which is the one thing that we can all agree on. We want smaller and lighter cars. But as is often the case with the FIA, it isn't as simple as just taking off one part and then leaving the rest as it is, because they've rewritten the entire rulebook when it comes to these hybrid engines. Currently, the split between the engine and the electrical energy is about 70-30. It might actually be 80-20, but the FIA wants to bring this to 50-50, with the batteries now being able to deploy more energy over the course of the lap. As it stands, the batteries have a maximum power output of 120 kilowatts, which translates to about 160 horsepower. From next season, this will increase to 350 kilowatts or 470 horsepower, which, I'll be honest, is pretty darn impressive, since the most powerful Tesla Model S can chuck out that from both of its axles to combine for over 1,000 horsepower. In turn, the power output of the actual ICE will drop to around 540 horsepower, with the battery making up the deficit, if that's the right word to use. And this has caused concern for 2 reasons. Number one is that we already have Formula E for electric racing. People are worried that this push towards a 50-50 split is going to make it more electric dependent, and we already have a series that is, well, electric dependent. At the same time, because you can now use 350 kilowatts of power and use it over the course of the entire lap, there's the worry that they'll be running out of energy way before the lap is even finished, which will make it degrade into what I'm going to call airplane mode racing. And by that I mean the car's doing whatever they can to save the battery. And it is a concern because the simulations have shown that it's too easy for the cars to deplete their battery and just be coasting using the ICE halfway down the straight. But this is where things get interesting in the meetings. On Thursday last week, the F1 team bosses met up in Geneva. And truth be told, the reason I didn't do this video on Friday is because I was doing the Ferrari F93 video instead, because it was one of those do a video earlier and then upload it because I've got other stuff on jobs. And the teams actually voted to have a catch-up clause in the engine regulations, at least in principle. What that means is there will be concessions allowed for manufacturers to work on the engines and develop more power if it's clear that one manufacturer has not got the regulations right. How they're actually going to do this, they haven't actually agreed on anything concrete yet, but it could be a number of things. It could be that the manufacturers will be allowed more testing time. They could increase the budget cap for an engine manufacturer if they do need to spend their way out of a hole, or waive the budget cap altogether. They also haven't figured out a way of actually determining how to allow one of the manufacturers to be able to work out their problems. There's obviously the prospect of sandbagging, but that's something else entirely. Another thing they haven't agreed on is how to actually make sure that the cars don't run out of battery. One of those proposals is limiting the amount of hybrid deployment, but just in the race. So maybe limiting the 350 kilowatts to the old 120, or maybe to 200 or something along those lines. But allowing that 350 kilowatts in qualifying so the cars are going as fast as they can possibly go. But this then presents its own issues. How much slower in the race will the cars be? Most people will be okay with the cars losing 1 to 1.5 seconds a lap over the previous rule set, because even if they are 1.5 seconds slower, they'll still be the fastest open wheel cars on the planet. But they could end up being too slow by comparison to the old regulations. But with the active aero now replacing DRS, the time could be made up that way because they'll be a lot faster in a straight line. Oh, and the overtake button will still allow an override to 350 kilowatts for an added attack or defense mechanism if they need it. 200 kilowatts is 270 horsepower. Combine this with the new specification of internal combustion engine, which is around 540-550 depending on which article you read, the total output combined is going to be over 800 horsepower, which is what Formula 1 cars had between 2006 and 2008. It then dropped to around 750 around 2013 because of KERS, fuel flow, rev limits, and also components limits, so it was all about saving. But despite having less power than they otherwise would, they've got the active aero, so they'll make up the speed in a straight line, but at least they'll be able to go the entire lap without running out of battery. You'd think. The other proposed method that they can't seem to move forward with is potentially having a D-rate system, where the amount of deployment decreases as the speed increases. The teams might already have something similar in place with their existing hybrid profiles, so that they can have the right amount of deployment in the parts of the circuit that are key to getting lap time. But this idea is a hard cap that is across all of the teams. So, as an example, up to a nominal speed, so let's say 280 kilometers an hour, you get the full 350 kilowatts of deployment. The second you hit 281 kilometers an hour, it begins to taper off, hitting maybe 300 kilowatts at 300, 250 at 320, which is 200 miles an hour, all the way down to 0 when you hit whatever 220 miles an hour in kilometers is. But unlike the teams doing it to save battery over the course of the lap with their specific engines and their specific cars and their specific profiles, this is the FIA's hard cap for max available deployment. The idea is that in doing so, there's no danger of the teams running out of battery before the end of the lap, and cars aren't trundling around trying to recoup the lost battery charge. Now this in turn has led to a little bit of politics. Red Bull's Christian Horner is more in favour of the simple hard D rate to 200 kilowatts in the race because of the on-paper pros outweighing the on-paper cons. The cars will be slower out of corners, but the battery will be more manageable, and there is still the override to deploy the full beans if the drivers want or need to use it. Like, I don't know, on an outlap or an inlap from the pits, or dodging lap traffic, or defending. In theory, it should be more consistent and there's less danger of drivers having to lift and coast in an aggressive manner just to get some juice back into the system. And, crucially, there should be more overtaking opportunities, because the offset between those having it and those not will be bigger. It attracted two kinds of comments online. The first set of comments being, Max was right, they're going to run out of battery too soon on the straights, or this YouTuber tried to warn us about it 12 months ago and nobody listened, and it's attracted the opposite. Christian Horner knows that his engine's going to be crap next year, and this is him trying to wiggle out of it and save himself having to build a new engine. Toto Wolff, on the other hand, is against any form of derating whatsoever, which is a pretty bold claim and has led to speculation that Mercedes may have cracked this new formula, and that they found a way of more efficiently deploying the battery over the course of the lap. But it has to be said and made abundantly clear in the interests of balance and, well, actually it's more facts, that Toto is against changing anything before the cars have run for the first time. That we need to make clear, which leaves things open for change if things aren't going so well. And Toto did say we should stick to the outcome of the last engine meeting to see how everything pans out next year, rather than trying to predict what it's going to be like. The power unit manufacturers clearly said in the meeting last Friday in Bahrain, let's get going, push the pause button for the moment, and then in 12 months' time decide whether there's something to do. But Christian Horner does have a point, even if he might be trying to deflect from the potential of Ford and Red Bull making an iffy engine for next year. Do we really want to see aggressive lift and coasting and battery saving on the straights? We might as well bring back the LMP1 spaceships and use those. The FIA is considering doing something. They apparently have data to see what's what and then make a decision based on the data they have. But while reading several articles, if only to read the comments on things, the comments made by Horner and Wolff seem to have got people getting the wrong end of the stick. Yes, there will be their own interests being protected, but people are reading Wolff is against and then coming to a conclusion without reading the whole thing. Because Wolff also has a point. Why put in these D-rates or reduce the amount of deployment available when we know the sweet sum of sod all about what's going to happen? Yes, there is the chance that Mercedes has indeed got it right and wants to protect itself in that respect. On one hand, why should they be penalised for getting their homework done properly? But on the other, if Mercedes has created a warp drive like they had between 2014 and 2020, Formula One's going to look quite silly again. And I am actually in favour of the catch-up rules should they be implemented. It's not balance of performance per se, because it's still the manufacturers that need to engineer themselves out of a hole, rather than having the governing body do it for them, as happens in GT3 racing and with the hypercars in the WEC. But can F1 afford to have one manufacturer running away with it again like it did in 2023 or between 2014 and 2020? And if there are engine freezes with no potential for engine manufacturers to catch up, it means that the advantage is locked in for far too long, and it means that things just look silly for a while. If you're a Max Verstappen fan, then 2023 was the best season in history. If you're a Michael Schumacher fan, then 2002 and 2004 were great, and so on. But for everybody else, they'll turn off. And it'll be the same if, I don't know, if Russell runs away with it next year, or if Leclerc runs away with it next year, or, I don't know, who else is on the grid? Lando? No, he's not going to win, is he? So it is interesting to see how things are going at the minute. You've got Horner being a bit more vocal about these D-rate values, which, in fairness, don't sound too unreasonable, and at the same time, you've got Toto, who wants to err on the side of caution and not do anything too hasty before we even know what's going on, which is also reasonable. Meanwhile, you've got Ferrari, Audi and Honda who are being a bit quieter and off to the side and not saying anything as of yet. The cards being kept well and truly close to their chests. There has to be a clear reason to do things. Fiddling with it now is just going to screw it up even more. Like mentioned, we are less than 12 months away from the changes coming in. We are far too close to the new regulations to start putting in different D rates or caps or whatever, because you're going to have, as an example, Audi and Honda building engines that are designed to use what the FIA set out in the original rulebook and then deploy that cap as efficiently as possible, if you follow me. To then be told less than 12 months before these engines come in, by the way, we're capping the race deployment to X. Audi and Honda are going to be very annoyed because they'll have sunk in a lot of money in getting the engines to deploy 350 kilowatts as efficiently as possible. Not 200 or 250 or whatever they might bring in. But Gary Anderson came up with his own solution. This being that the ERS be allowed to put out 180 kilowatts of power, which is a 60 kilowatt increase on what is currently available, but less than the 200 or so that Horner would like to see it capped at in the race. The V6 in its 2025 state with the turbocharger is close to 740 horsepower, so it's around what they had in 2013. But with these new fuels, they're going to have a little less power, so Gary puts it around 700 horsepower for the ICE. But add the two together, it's still 941 brake horsepower, a 4% increase on what is currently available, and about 130 more on the Horner solution, as we'll call it. The thing is, Anderson's solution would require more fuel due to a higher fuel flow, so the cars will be slightly heavier to start with. But in qualifying, he would allow full battery deployment at the 350 kilowatt level. Anderson did admit that his solution would be difficult to achieve, but would result in times about 1.6 seconds a lap slower on average, whereas the Horner solution would be maybe a little bit more. How much? I don't know. I'm not a Formula 1 engineer, but it is an interesting solution. It just depends on what you want to get out of it. It's kind of weird that Formula 1 is trying to find a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. At least, yet. The manufacturers agreed to these regulations ages ago, so unless this is something that they hadn't considered that is now starting to manifest itself, again, I don't know. I'm not an engineer. We've known for a while that this new formula would likely end up being an engine formula. The 50-50 split did seem ambitious, and it's all because of how the world is going in terms of technology, and the manufacturers, most notably Mercedes, Honda and Audi, have been on the EV and hybrid engineering bandwagon for a very long time now. In fact, Audi was building hybrids for racing long before Formula 1 brought them in, and adding more electric power was a condition for Audi coming in the first place, along with getting Honda to stay. But I do agree with Toto. Let's see if there's a problem first, and then we'll see if it needs fixing. With Horner's solution, weirdly. I do laugh, but Horner's solution does sound a decent compromise. The cars will still have plenty of power available, and because of the active aero, they're still going to be fast in a straight line, so it offsets the power disadvantage that they might end up having. But at the end of it all, we just want to see good racing. And if that means having lap times that are 5 seconds a lap slower, so be it. The discussions are still ongoing, but these early discussions haven't lessened any fears as to how bad, at least potentially, these engines could be. But if you have got any ideas as to what is going on, then please, answers on a postcard. And if you do know what's going on, you might want to consider getting a job at the FIA. So then, a look at the confusion and fears surrounding the new engine rules that will be in effect from 2026 onwards. If this video has stimulated your brain cells and made you think a bit about what's going on, then do like the video so I know I did a good job. And for more stuff from the channel, whether that be the current affairs stuff or the history stuff that makes up the bulk of what I do here, then you've got the subscribe button that you can click if you've not already subscribed, and the bell as well, so you'll never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon that continue to support me at a more personal level. And if you want to help contribute to the picture purchasing piggy bank or otherwise keep the lights on, there's a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks for the one and done sorts of donations and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.